What happens when a fake relationship becomes dangerously real? Adela Chen never imagined that signing a simple contract with her billionaire CEO boss would change her life forever. When Aller Thornfield desperately needs a fake girlfriend to escape his mother's matchmaking schemes and secure his inheritance, he turns to the one woman who's never wanted anything from him, his loyal assistant. Asterisk calling all love story lovers. Today's episode is a roller coaster of emotions, fate, and one meeting that changes everything. Asterisk the rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 42nd floor, each droplet exploding like tiny grenades against the glass. Adela Chen pressed her palm against the cold surface, watching the city blur into watercolor streaks. Below, the corporate tower felt like a prison tonight, all steel and shadows, with the scent of expensive leather and fear lingering in the recycled air. "You're insane if you think I'm doing this." She turned to face Aller Thornfield, who sat behind his mahogany desk like a king surveying his kingdom. His dark suit was impeccable despite the late hour, not a thread out of place, but his ice blue eyes betrayed something raw beneath the polished exterior. The scar that ran from his left temple to his jaw caught the lamplight, a reminder of whatever hell had carved him into this cold masterpiece. "Double salary for 3 months," he repeated, sliding the contract across the desk's surface. "Live with me on weekends. Attend family functions. Convince my mother we're madly in love." Adela's laugh came out bitter, echoing off the marble floors. "Your mother isn't stupid, Aller?" Elizabeth Thornfield could smell a fake romance from across the Atlantic. "That's why it can't be fake." All the words hung between them like a loaded weapon. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky, and the lights of the city flickered like dying stars. Adela had worked as his personal assistant for 2 years, long enough to know that Aller Thornfield never spoke without calculating every syllable. Long enough to recognize the desperation he was trying to hide beneath that Arctic composure. "What aren't you telling me?" She moved closer to the desk, her heels clicking against the floor like a countdown timer.
"Alvin?"
"This isn't just about avoiding blind dates." Aller's jaw tightened. For a moment, the mask slipped and she saw something that looked almost like fear flicker across his features. "My father's will contains a clause. If I'm not married by my 35th birthday, control of Thornfield Industries transfers to my cousin Marcus." "And when exactly do you turn 35? "For months." The admission fell between them like a stone into still water, sending ripples of implication in every direction. Adela sank into the leather chair across from his desk, her mind racing. She'd seen Marcus Thornfield at company events, all oily. Smiles and wandering hands, the kind of man who collected women like trophies and discarded them just as easily. "Why me?" she whispered. Aller leaned forward, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Because you're the only woman who's never wanted anything from me. You've seen me at my worst, and you're still here. My mother will believe it because it's the one thing she'd never expect." The truth of it hit her like a physical blow. 2 years of late nights of watching him work himself into the ground, fielding calls from women whose names she forgot as quickly as she scheduled them. 2 years of pretending she didn't notice the way his eyes lingered on her sometimes, or the way her pulse quickened when he said her name. "What happens after 3 months?" she asked. "We break up. Quietly, amicably. You get a glowing recommendation. And enough money to start over anywhere you want." Start over. The phrase tasted like ashes in her mouth. She thought of her empty apartment, her silent phone, the way her own family had stopped calling after she'd chosen this job over their expectations. Maybe running away wouldn't be such a terrible thing. "And if I say no?" Aller's expression went cold again, the vulnerable moment sealed away behind his corporate armor. "Then you say no. I find another solution." "But Adela." He stood, moving around the desk until he was close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. "I'm asking because I trust you. It's not something I give away easily." The thunder crashed overhead and the lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a heartbeat later, bathing them in an eerie red glow. In that crimson darkness, with the storm raging outside and the city spread below them like a circuit board, Adela felt the last of her resistance crumble. 3 months, she said. 3 months, he agreed. She reached for the pen, but his hand covered hers, warm and calloused, despite his executive lifestyle. "There's something else you should know." Her heart hammered against her ribs. "What?" "Once we start this, there's no going back. My world will eat you alive if you show any weakness. Can you handle that?" Looking up into his face half-shadowed by the emergency lights, Adela realized she was about to step off a cliff into freefall. But maybe that was exactly what she needed. "Try me," she whispered, and signed her name on the contract that would change everything. The Thornfield estate sprawled across 20 acres of manicured perfection. All ivy-covered stone and gardens that looked like they'd been painted by Impressionist masters. Adela gripped the leather handle of her weekend bag tighter as Aller's. Aston Martin crunched up the gravel driveway, each stone seeming to announce their arrival like gunshots. "Remember," Aller murmured as the imposing front doors came into view, "we've been secretly dating for 6 months. You're shy about public displays of affection, but we can't keep our hands off each other in private." He'd crawled up Adela's neck. "How exactly am I supposed to fake that?" Eyes found hers in the rearview mirror, and something electric passed between them. "Who says you'll be faking?" Before she could process that loaded statement, the car stopped, and a butler materialized to take their bags. Aller came around to her side, opening the door with practiced gallantry. When he offered his hand, she took it, and the spark that shot through her fingers felt dangerously real. The foyer was a cathedral of marble and crystal with oil paintings of stern-faced Thornfield ancestors watching from gilded frames. Elizabeth Thornfield descended the curved staircase like a queen making her entrance, her silver hair perfectly coiffed, her steel-gray eyes missing nothing. "Aller, darling." She kissed the air beside his cheeks, then turned that penetrating gaze on Adela and my future daughter-in-law. "Lovely to see you again." "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Thornfield," Adela managed, her voice steadier than she felt. "Elizabeth, please. We're family now." The words were warm, but the smile was calculating. "I've planned a small dinner party tonight. Nothing to elaborate. Just 20 of our closest friends." Aller's hand found the small of Adela's back, a possessive gesture that sent shivers down her spine. "Mother, we discussed this. Adela values her privacy." "Which is precisely why I'm so intrigued by her." Elizabeth's eyes glittered with predatory interest. "Any woman who can capture my son's heart so completely must be truly extraordinary." The weight of those words settled over Adela like a heavy coat. She was about to respond when footsteps echoed from the main hallway, and Marcus Thornfield appeared. His expensive suit unable to disguise the softness around his middle or the cruel curve of his mouth. Well, if it isn't the happy couple." Marcus's voice dripped with false charm as he approached, his eyes lingering too long on Adela's figure. "I must say, cousin, your taste has improved considerably." Aller's body went rigid beside her, and Adela could feel the tension radiating from him like heat from a furnace. "Marcus, I was just telling Mother how curious it is that none of us knew about this romance." Marcus accepted a crystal tumbler of whiskey from a passing servant. "Adela, isn't it? Tell me, how long have you been working for my cousin?" The question was a trap, and they all knew it. Adela lifted her chin, channeling every ounce of confidence she possessed. "Long enough to know that the best relationships build slowly. We wanted to be sure before making it public." "How romantic," Marcus purred, "and how convenient, given Father's will."
Oh.
The air in the room went arctic. Elizabeth's perfectly composed expression didn't waver, but her knuckles went white around her wineglass. "He might actually hit his cousin. That's enough." Elizabeth's voice could have cut glass. "Marcus, perhaps you should prepare for dinner. Aller, why don't you show Adela to her room? She want to freshen up." As they climbed the grand staircase, Aller's hand never left her back, but his touch had gone from possessive to protective. "I should have warned you about Marcus," he said quietly. "He's been trying to undermine me since we were children. Is he right? About the will?" Aller stopped at a heavy oak door, his hand on the brass handle. "Partly, but there's more too it than that." He opened the door to reveal a suite that belonged in a luxury hotel, all cream silk and antique furniture. French doors led to a balcony overlooking the gardens, where fairy lights twinkled like captured stars. It was beautiful and intimidating, and completely overwhelming. Aller. She turned to find him watching her with an expression she couldn't read. "What aren't you telling me?" He moved closer, backing her against the closed door. His hands came up to frame her face, thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "If we do this, really do this, there's no guarantee we both come out unbroken." "What do you mean?" Instead of answering, he leaned down until his forehead touched hers, until she could feel his breath against her lips. "Marcus isn't just after the company. He's dangerous, Adela. If he thinks you're a threat to his plans, he'll what?" Aller's eyes went dark, and she saw something in them that made her stomach drop. Guilt, fear, a pain so deep it had carved trenches in his soul. "He destroyed the last woman I cared about," he whispered. "I won't let him destroy you too." Before she could ask what he meant, before she could process the admission that he cared about her, he was gone, leaving her alone with questions that felt like live wires under her skin. That night, as she lay in the enormous four-poster bed, listening to the house settle around her, Adela realized she'd signed more than a contract. She'd signed her name to a war she didn't understand, with stakes she was only beginning to grasp. And somewhere in the darkness beyond her door, she could swear she heard footsteps that didn't belong to Aller. The dinner party was a battlefield disguised as fine dining. 20 of society's most influential figures sat around Elizabeth's mahogany table, their conversations sharp as the crystal they sipped from, their smiles razor-thin. Midnight blue dress that Aller had sent to her room with a note that simply read, "Trust me," and from the appreciative glances around the table, she understood why. So Adela purred Victoria Ashworth, a socialite whose husband owned half the city's newspapers. "What exactly do you do at Thornfield Industries?" The question hung in the air like smoke from expensive cigars. Adela felt every eye at the table turn toward her, including Marcus's, which glittered with malicious anticipation. "I manage Aller's schedule and correspondence," she replied smoothly, taking a sip of wine that tasted like liquid gold. "Though I suppose that's about to change." Elizabeth leaned forward slightly. "Oh, and why is that?" Adela felt Aller tense beside her, his thigh pressing against hers under the table. This was it. The moment that would either sell their charade or destroy it completely. "Well," Adela said, letting her voice soften with just the right amount of shy happiness, "it's difficult to maintain professional boundaries when you're planning a wedding." The collective intake of breath was audible. Elizabeth's fork froze halfway to her mouth. Marcus's whiskey glass shattered against the marble floor. "A wedding?" Victoria gasped. "When? Where? We must have details." Aller's hand found hers on the table, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that looked effortless, but felt like electricity. "We haven't set a date yet," he said, his voice steady, despite the chaos they'd just unleashed. "But soon. Very soon." The rest of dinner passed in a blur of congratulations and increasingly invasive questions, all of which Adela and Aller navigated with the precision of dancers who'd rehearsed for years instead of days. But underneath the performance, she was aware of Marcus, watching them with the focused intensity of a predator studying its prey. Later, as the guests filtered out into the night air, filled with jasmine and possibility, Elizabeth cornered them in the foyer. "That was quite an announcement," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "We wanted to tell you privately first." Aller lied smoothly, but the moment felt right. Elizabeth studied them both for a long moment, then smiled. For the first time since Adela had met her, it looked genuine. "I'm happy for you both. Truly. Your father would be proud, Aller." Something shifted in Aller's expression, a crack in his armor that Adela had never seen before. "Mother, Mrs. Thornfield," Marcus interrupted, appearing at Elizabeth's elbow. "Like a shadow given form, might I have a word with my cousin about business matters?" "Actually," Adela said, surprising herself with her boldness, "I'm feeling rather tired. Aller, would you walk me up?" She saw the gratitude flash across his face before he nodded. "Of course, Marcus, we can discuss business in the morning." But as they climbed the stairs, Marcus's voice drifted up after them, pitched low enough that only they could hear. "Enjoy it while it lasts, cousin." Some contracts are easier to break than others. In the hallway outside her room, Aller pulled her close, his hands spanning her waist. To anyone watching, it would look like a romantic good night. But his grip was tight enough to bruise, and his voice was urgent against her ear. "We need to talk. My room. 10 minutes." Her heart hammered as she nodded, then slipped inside her suite. She waited exactly 10 minutes, then padded barefoot down the hallway to the master's suite at the end of the wing. Aller's room was a study, in masculine elegance, all dark wood and leather, with windows that overlooked the gardens. He stood silhouetted against them, still in his dinner jacket, but with his bow tie undone, looking like a figure from a noir film. "You were perfect tonight," he said, without turning around. "Too perfect." "What do you mean?" He faced her then, and the look in his eyes made her take an involuntary step backward. The wedding announcement. That wasn't part of the plan. Heat flooded her cheeks, panicked. "They were getting suspicious, and I thought you thought right." He moved toward her with predatory grace. "But now we're committed to something far more dangerous than a fake relationship." "How much more dangerous can it get?" His laugh was bitter. "Marcus killed the last woman I was engaged to." The words hit her like a physical blow. Adela sank onto the leather sofa, her legs suddenly unsteady. "What?" Her name was Sophia. Aller's voice went flat, emotionless. "We were engaged 3 years ago. She was everything my family wanted. Beautiful, connected from the right background. But she was also curious about the family business. Started asking questions about our overseas investments. Marcus arranged a car accident, made it look like she'd been drinking." His hands clenched into fists. "I couldn't prove it, but I knew. I've always known." Adela felt sick. "Why? Didn't you tell me this before? Because you never would have signed the contract?" He knelt in front of her, taking her hands in his. "But now it's too late. You're in this, and Marcus sees you as a threat, so what do we do?" His eyes searched her face, and she saw the exact moment he made his decision. "We make it real." "What?" "The engagement. The wedding. All of it." His grip on her hands tightened. "It's the only way to protect you. Once you're legally a Thornfield, Marcus can't touch you without bringing the entire family down."
How the room
seemed to tilt around her. "You're asking me to marry you?" "Actually marry you. I'm asking you to trust me." His voice was raw with an emotion she'd never heard from him before. "I know it's insane. I know it's not what you signed up for." "Adela, I can't lose you too." The admission hung between them like a bridge over an abyss. Outside, storm clouds gathered again, and lightning flickered in the distance. Adela thought of her empty apartment, her silent phone, her carefully constructed life that had felt more like a prison than a home. Then she thought of Sophia, beautiful, and curious, and dead. "If I do this," she whispered, "if I marry you, what happens to us? After Marcus is dealt with, after the company is secure." Aller's thumb traced across her knuckles. "I don't know. I wish I could promise you a fairy tale ending, but I'm not that kind of man. I'm damaged goods, Adela, scarred inside and out." She looked at him then, really looked at him. Did the scar on his face, the guarded expression that never quite left. His eyes, the way he held himself like he was always braced for the next blow. But underneath all that armor, she saw something else. Something worth fighting for. "Yes," she said. "Yes. Yes. I'll marry you." She stood, pulling him up with her. "But I have conditions." A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine one she'd ever seen from him. "Name them. No more lies between us. There's no more secrets. And if we're doing this, we're doing it right. I want a real wedding, Aller. I want to feel like a bride, not a chess piece." He cupped her face in his hands, and for a moment she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he pressed his forehead against hers. "Deal," he whispered. Thunder rolled across the sky, and Adela realized she was about to become part of a family where love was a luxury and survival was an art form. 3 weeks later, Adela stood in the bridal suite of the Thornfield family chapel, a reflection staring back at her from an antique mirror that had seen generations of brides. The wedding dress was a masterpiece of ivory silk and Belgian lace. chosen by Elizabeth with an attention to detail that spoke of genuine affection. But as Adela smoothed the delicate fabric over her hips, all she could think about was the conversation she'd overheard that morning. The prenup is ironclad, Marcus had been saying to someone on his phone as she passed his office. Once she signs it, she gets nothing if the marriage dissolves within 5 years. And trust me, it will dissolve. I'll make sure of it. Now, with her bouquet of white roses trembling in her hands, Adela wondered if she'd made the biggest mistake of her life. The chapel doors seemed impossibly far away, and beyond them waited a future she couldn't predict. A soft knock interrupted her spiraling thoughts. "Come in." Elizabeth entered, resplendent in champagne-colored silk, her expression softer than Adela had ever seen it. "You look beautiful, my dear. Truly radiant." "Thank you." Adela's voice came out steadier than she felt. Elizabeth moved to stand beside her, their reflections side by side in the mirror. "I know this all happened quickly, perhaps too quickly." She paused, studying Adela's face. "Are you having second thoughts?" The question was loaded with more meaning than its surface suggested. Adela met Elizabeth's eyes in the mirror, searching for judgment and finding only genuine concern. "Would it matter if I was?" Smile played at the corners of Elizabeth's mouth. "My son has never been an easy man to love. He's been hurt deeply, and wounded animals tend to lash out at those who try to help them." She placed a gentle hand on Adela's shoulder. "But he looks at you the way his father used to look. At me, like you're the only thing in the world worth protecting." Before Adela could respond, the chapel doors opened and the wedding march began. Elizabeth squeezed her shoulder once, then took her place as mother of the groom. Walking down that aisle felt like stepping into a fairy tale and a nightmare simultaneously. The chapel was filled with white flowers and golden light, 200 guests rising as she passed, but all she could see was Aller waiting for her at the altar. He wore a charcoal gray morning coat that made his eyes look like Arctic ice, but when their gazes met, something warm and hungry flickered there. Standing beside him, Marcus watched her approach with a smile that made her skin crawl. The ceremony passed in a blur of ancient words and modern promises. When it came time for vows, Aller took her hands and spoke words that sounded rehearsed but felt frighteningly real. "Adela, you came into my life when I thought I was beyond redemption. You've shown me that trust isn't a weakness, and that love isn't always a trap. I promise to protect you, to cherish you, and to be worthy of the faith you've placed in me." Her own vows stuck in her throat. How could she promise forever when she wasn't even sure about tomorrow? But looking into his face, seeing the vulnerability he was trying so hard to hide, she found her voice. "Aller, you've taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it. I promise to stand beside you, to face whatever comes, and to never give up on us, even when you give up on yourself." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Aller's kiss was gentle, reverent, and entirely too brief. But in that moment, sunlight streaming through stained glass, and 200 people applauding their union, Adela almost believed in happy endings. The reception was a glittering affair in the estate's ballroom, with champagne that cost more than most people's monthly salary and an orchestra that made every dance feel like a scene from a movie. Adela floated through it all in a haze of congratulations and well-wishes, her hand never leaving Aller's arm. But as the evening wore on, she began to notice things. Whispered conversations that stopped when she approached. Glances that lingered too long, and Marcus, always Marcus, watching from the shadows with that predatory smile. During their first dance as husband and wife, Aller pulled her close, his mouth against her ear. "Magnificent tonight," he murmured. "I almost believe we're real." The words were meant to be playful, but they cut deeper than any blade. "Almost." His grip tightened on her waist. "Adela, I'm Mr. and Mrs. Thornfield." A waiter appeared beside them with a silver tray bearing 2 champagne flutes, compliments of Mr. Marcus. Aller's entire body went rigid. His eyes found Marcus. Across the room, who raised his own glass in a mocking toast, without hesitation, Aller knocked both glasses from the tray, sending them crashing to the marble floor. "What are you doing?" Adela hissed. "We're leaving now?" His voice was deadly calm, but she could see the panic in his eyes. They made their excuses to Elizabeth, who watched their hasty departure with concern, then hurried to their suite on the third floor. The moment the door closed behind them, Aller was on the phone. "I need a full toxicology workup on whatever was in those glasses," he barked to whoever answered. "And I want Marcus's whereabouts accounted for every minute of today." "What's going on?" He ended the call and turned to face her, running his hands through his hair. "Marcus is accelerating his timeline. Champagne was probably drugged. Nothing fatal, just enough to make you sick, to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the marriage." Adela sank onto the silk-covered bench at the foot of the bed, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled milk. "How do you know all this?" "Because it's what I would do." The admission came out flat and emotionless. "This is my world, Adela. This is what the Thornfield name really means. Power games and poison drinks, and people who smile while they plan your destruction." She looked up at him, this man who was now legally her husband, and saw not the confident CEO, but a scared, damaged soul who'd been fighting this war his entire life. "Then we fight back," she said. She stood, her chin lifting with a defiance that surprised them both. "You said no more lies? No more secrets? So tell me everything. Every dirty trick, every family secret, every weapon Marcus has at his disposal, and then we destroy him." Aller stared at her for a long moment, and she saw the exact instant he fell completely, irrevocably in love with her. It was written across his face like lightning against a dark sky, beautiful and terrifying and absolutely undeniable. "Mrs. Thornfield," he said, moving toward her with predatory grace, "I think you're going to fit into this family perfectly." But as his hands framed her face and his mouth descended toward hers, neither of them saw the shadow that passed by their window or noticed the tiny recording device that had been planted in their bouquet of white roses. The recording device arrived at Adela's office the following Monday, wrapped in tissue paper with a note that made her blood turn to ice. "Play me before you trust him completely. A concerned friend." Her hands shook as she plugged the tiny device into her computer, and Aller's voice filled the room, crystal clear and devastating. "The marriage is purely strategic, Mother. Adela is intelligent and loyal, but she's not stupid enough to believe this is about love. She knows exactly what she signed up for." Elizabeth's response was muffled, but Aller's reply came through with brutal clarity. "Of course I care about her safety, but let's not romanticize the situation. She's an employee who agreed to an extended contract, nothing more. Once Marcus is neutralized and the company is secure, we'll quietly dissolve the marriage. Be well compensated for her service." The recording ended, leaving Adela staring at her computer screen through a haze of tears. Every tender moment, every heated glance, every whispered promise had been nothing but performance art. She'd been so thoroughly played that she'd actually fallen in love with her own deception. A soft knock interrupted her breakdown. "Come in, Aller." Entered, looking devastatingly handsome in his charcoal suit, carrying coffee and wearing the gentle smile that had become her weakness over the past month. "Good morning, Mrs. Thornfield." He set the coffee on her desk and leaned down to kiss her temple, a gesture that had become routine. "You left early this morning?" "I had things to take care of." Her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. He studied her face with growing concern. "Are you all right? You look pale." This was her moment. She could confront him, demand explanations, force him to admit what she'd heard, ere she could play the game better than he ever had. "I'm perfect," she lied, standing to straighten his tie with hands that barely trembled. "Just tired from all the wedding excitement." His smile was warm and genuine, and it nearly broke her resolve. "Well, I have news that might perk you up. The board meeting is moved to this Friday instead of next month. Marcus called for an emergency session." "What does that mean?" "It means he's making his move." Aller's eyes went cold and calculating. "But we're ready for him. The marriage gives me the legitimacy I need to counter his claims about the will." And after, the question slipped out before she could stop it. "After we win, you mean?" He cupped her face in his hands, and she had to fight not to lean into the touch. "After we have our whole lives to figure out what this means." The lie, rolled off his tongue so smoothly that she almost believed it herself. Almost. Friday morning arrived gray and stormy, matching Adela's mood as she sat in the boardroom's gallery, watching the 12 most powerful people in the company decide her husband's fate. Marcus had dressed for war in a navy suit that made his cold eyes look like chips of Arctic ice, while Aller appeared relaxed and confident despite the stakes. "The will is quite clear," Marcus was saying, standing before a projection of the relevant legal documents. Marriage to a suitable woman of good family and social standing by the 35th birthday. I submit that this hasty union to a former employee fails both criteria. Murmurs rippled through the board members. Adela felt sick. Elizabeth spoke from her position at the head of the table. "Mr. Marcus, are you suggesting that my daughter-in-law is unsuitable?" "I'm suggesting that the marriage is a sham." Marcus smiled like a shark scenting blood. "A business arrangement designed to circumvent our father's wishes. Can you prove that?" Aller's voice was deadly quiet. Marcus's smile widened. "As a matter of fact, I can." The recording of Aller's voice filled the boardroom, every damning word echoing off the marble walls. Adela watched her husband's face go white as his own voice betrayed him, describing their marriage as nothing more than a strategic business decision. When it ended, the silence was deafening. "Well," said board member Harrison Wright, after a long moment, "this is quite damaging." Adela stood up in the gallery, surprising everyone, including herself. "May I address the board?" Elizabeth nodded slowly. "Mrs. Thornfield has the floor." Adela walked down to the main floor, her heels clicking against marble with the rhythm of her racing heart. When she reached the center of the room, she turned to face the 12 people who held their future in their hands. "That recording is accurate," she began, and gasps echoed around the room. Aller's face went ashen. "My husband did describe our marriage as strategic, and I did agree to what was essentially an extended employment contract." Marcus's triumphant smile faltered as she continued. "But what that recording doesn't capture is what happened after those words were spoken. It doesn't show you the man who held me when I had nightmares about being poisoned at our own wedding reception. It doesn't show you the husband who spent 3 weeks learning to make my favorite breakfast because he noticed I always skipped meals when I was stressed." She turned to look at Aller, who was staring at her like she was a ghost. "Doesn't show you the moment I realized that love isn't always about grand romantic gestures. Sometimes it's about finding someone who sees all your broken pieces and chooses to stay anyway." The room was utterly silent. "Marcus is right about one thing," she continued, facing the board again. "This marriage began as a business arrangement, but business arrangements don't require the kind of sacrifice I'm about to make." She reached into her purse and withdrew a thick legal document, placing it on the table before Elizabeth. "This is my resignation from Thornfield Industries. Effective immediately. It's also a complete waiver of any financial claims against the Thornfield estate, including the prenuptial agreement and the original contract compensation." Elizabeth picked up the document, scanning it quickly. "Adela, what are you doing?" "I'm proving that some things are more valuable than money or power." She looked directly at Marcus, whose face had gone from triumphant to concerned. "I'm staying married to Aller not because I'm paid to, but because I choose to." "Marcus, if you want to challenge the legitimacy of a marriage where one partner just walked away from millions of dollars to stay with the other, be my guest." The silence stretched like a held breath. Then Harrison Wright began to clap, slowly at first, then with genuine appreciation. One by one, the other board members joined him. "Motion to table the leadership challenge," Wright announced. "All in favor?" 11 hands rose. Only Marcus abstained, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. As the board members filed out, congratulating Aller and expressing their admiration for Adela's speech, she felt a hand on her elbow. "That was quite a performance," Marcus murmured, his voice pitched low enough that only she could hear. "Don't think this is over. People like you don't belong in families like ours." "You're right," she replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I don't belong. I earned my place." Marcus's smile was pure poison. Enjoy it while it lasts. When the boardroom finally emptied except for family, Elizabeth approached Adela with tears in her eyes. "My dear, what you just did." Shook her head in amazement. "I've never seen anything like it." "I meant every word," Adela said simply. "I know you did. That's what made it so powerful." Elizabeth turned to her son, who hadn't spoken since the recording ended. "Aller, I believe you owe your wife an apology." But Aller was staring at Adela like he was seeing her for the first time. "You gave up everything," he said hoarsely. "The money, the security, everything." "No," she corrected. "I gave up nothing." That mattered. He crossed the room in 3 quick strides, cupping her face in his hands. "Why? After what you heard, after knowing it started as a lie, why would you protect me?" "Because somewhere between the contract and the wedding, between the fear and the fighting, I fell in love with the man behind the armor." She reached up to trace the scar on his face, the mark that had always reminded her he was breakable. "Because I finally figured out that you fell in love with me too, even if you're too scared to admit it." Adela. Her name came out like a prayer. "The recording was from before the wedding," she continued. "Before you saw me in that dress and realized you were in trouble. Before you spent our wedding night just holding me because I was shaking from everything Marcus had put us through. Before you looked at me yesterday morning and I saw your whole world change." He leaned his forehead against hers, his voice breaking. "I've never been good at love. Everyone I've ever cared about gets hurt, and we'll have to learn together." She smiled through her tears. "Besides, you're stuck with me now." I burned all my bridges in there. His laugh was shaky but genuine. "Mrs. Thornfield, you are absolutely terrifying. Good thing you like dangerous women." When he kissed her this time, it wasn't gentle or reverent. It was desperate and hungry and full of promises he was finally brave enough to make. And Adela kissed him back with everything she had, sealing their fate with fire and hope. Later that evening, as they sat in their living room with Chinese takeout and wine that cost more than most people's cars, Aller's phone rang. The number was blocked. "Don't answer it," Adela said. "I have to." He picked up the call, putting it on speaker. "Hello. Congratulations on your victory today." Marcus's voice was silk over steel. "But this isn't over, Marcus." Aller's tone was warning. "Tell me, cousin, does your beautiful wife know about the real reason Sophia died? About what you did to ensure she would never expose our family's secrets?" The blood drained from Aller's face. Adela felt the world tilt sideways. "What is he talking about?" she whispered. Marcus's laughter was cold. "Oh, this is delicious. You never told her, did you? About how you discovered Sophia was working for the FBI? About how you fed her false information that led her straight into that car accident?" "Enough." Aller's voice was barely human. "Sweet dreams, both of you." The line went dead. Adela stared at her husband, searching his face for denial and finding only guilt. "Tell me he's lying." Aller closed his eyes. "I can't." The admission hit her like a physical blow. "You killed her. Killed the woman you were supposed to marry. I protected my family." Voice was hollow. "Was going to destroy everything. Everyone I loved would have gone to prison. And now, words came out like broken glass. Am I going to end up in a car accident too if I ask the wrong questions?" He looked at her then, and she saw a man drowning in his own darkness. "I would die before I hurt you. You already have." She stood, moving toward the door on unsteady legs. Behind her, she heard him call her name, heard the desperation in his voice, but she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the wall and tried to breathe. She'd given up everything for a man who was capable of murder. She defended him, loved him, bound herself to him legally and emotionally, and despite everything, despite the horror and betrayal and crushing weight of the truth, she realized with crystal clarity that she couldn't leave him, not because she was trapped, but because she understood him. The scared boy who'd grown up in a world where love was a weapon and trust was a luxury. The man who'd made impossible choices to protect the people he cared about. The husband who looked at her like she was his salvation. When she returned to the living room, he was sitting with his head in his hands, looking utterly defeated. "I'm not Sophia," she said quietly. He looked up, hope flickering in his eyes. I'm not FBI. I'm not investigating your family, and I'm not going anywhere. She sat beside him, taking his hands in hers. But no more secrets, Aller. If we're going to make this work, if we're going to survive your family and Marcus, and whatever else comes our way, I need to know everything. Everything could destroy us. Secrets already almost did. He was quiet. For a long time, and she could practically see him wrestling with decades of carefully guarded truths. Finally, he nodded. Everything, he agreed. But Adela, do you know it all? If you want to leave, I'll help you disappear. New identity, new life, completely clean break. I won't trap you in this world. She leaned over and kissed him softly, tasting salt and sorrow and the promise of redemption. Ask me again in 50 years, she whispered, outside. Storm clouds gathered over the city, but inside their sanctuary of stolen light and hard-won love, Mr. and Mrs. Thornfield began the long work of learning to trust each other with the truth. It wouldn't be easy. Love in their world never was. But as Aller pulled her into his arms and began to tell her about offshore accounts and political favors and all the beautiful, terrible ways the Thornfield family had built their empire, Adela realized she'd found something worth fighting for, even if it might destroy them both. Asterisk. If you enjoy stories about love conquering impossible odds, don't forget to like this video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe too. Never miss another captivating story or amazing stories coming soon. Turn on notifications so you never miss our latest uploads. Tell us in the comments. Would you sign a contract like Adela's? Like if you want more billionaire romance stories? The END.